radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
All right, good evening, Fade to Black. How you doing? How you doing? Today is Monday, March 25th, 2024. Another great week straight ahead here on Fade to Black. And we're kicking it off tonight the right way. I've been waiting to do tonight's show for around 35 years. That's right. Robert M. Knight is with us. He is truly a world-class talent, music, photographer. I would say rock and roll, but I'm going to have to say music. And whose work you have been looking at and admiring for years and years and years. He is with us tonight. And the strange part about this, and I'll be talking to Robert about this, well, actually, I'll save all of that for the show. But the title of the show is Rock Stars and UFOs. I couldn't come up with anything else. I don't know why I did that, but I'm just so excited because I am giddy. I am very happy to have not only a friend and a great UFO researcher, but one of the people that has captured the moments of rock and roll for us for decades. And we're going to be going through all of that tonight with Robert. Tomorrow night, Vivian Chavez is with us. We're going to be talking about our galactic origins and starseeds. Wednesday night, James Keenan is here. He's going to be talking about his research up at Skinwalker Ranch and Blind Frog Ranch, and of course the TV shows and all of that he's a part of. We're going to be doing that Wednesday night with James Keenan. Thursday night, AMA Ask Jimmy Anything. And I know that we try to do this usually once a month, and it's been a couple of months. It's been very busy around here, but finally we've got an AMA scheduled, and it's so much fun with me just to hang out with all of you and answer all of your questions. So we'll be doing that Thursday night. But tonight, it's about Robert M. Knight. We're going to be talking about rock stars, his personal encounters with UAP and NHI, remote viewing, and his relationship and friendship with Ingo Swann, and much more. He is, I'm going to say, the prominent figure in rock photography. He has, since the 1960s to now, he has been around the world, and he has photographed everybody from Jimi Hendrix to Jeff Beck, Led Zeppelin, Stevie Ray Vaughan. I've been around him for so many photo sessions too as well. So I could just off the top of my head, Bob Seger, Santana, ZZ Top. Well, I have to ask, it's like that in Bob's world. And we're going to do all of that and much more tonight. And without reading the longest bio in the world, I'm going to get straight to it and say, welcome, Robert M. Knight. Can you believe you're on my show?
I know, 35 years. That's how long we've known each other.
Yeah, that is just crazy to me, Robert. And welcome. Now, listen,
Thank you.
This is, you get the first time guest disclaimer, and between you and I, it's going to be strange for me to do, but it's a tradition. So first time guest, you are indeed a first time guest. You get the first time guest disclaimer, which is, Robert, it's just you and I sitting on my couch having a conversation as friends. And where the conversation starts, it starts. Where it ends, but we're going to end as friends. It's weird. It's weird between the two of us, but you have to accept.
I do.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. I was thinking. Okay, let's back all of this up. I'm going to start here. We've known each other. I'm going to say since we were kids, right? Okay, so
It seems like it.
yeah, we've known each other for a long time, but I didn't find out about your other life until about 10 years ago when you reached out to
Yeah.
me. I was like, what? Wait. This, you can't be the same Robert M. Knight that I'm friends with. It's got to be somebody else. And you go, no, Jimmy, and we had this long exchange. It's about 10 years ago. And isn't it funny how you think you know somebody and then you really don't? And you didn't know about me either, right? And
No.
yeah, it's so strange, so strange. The rock and roll side of it, though, which is, I want to get the music part out of the way first. Um, it, when you chase your dreams, we were talking about this before the show. When you chase your dreams, and for you, it's a camera, it's a roll of film, it's a moment, right? But at such an early young age, did you understand bliss and where your life was about to go when you started taking pictures up in San Francisco?
I think in the second half of the show, you'll understand where this actually came from. But I grew up in Hawaii, and I grew up in a very restrictive situation. My father was a Baptist minister, so I wasn't allowed to listen to the radio, go to concerts, movies, that sort of thing. And one day I was walking through Waikiki. I might have been 14 or 15, and I found some magazines that some British tourists had left. And in there were all these photographs of disheveled looking guys with long hair and guitars. And I couldn't figure out what this was about. But obviously, it was music of some form. And in this magazine, you could send away for these albums from the Heener Record Center in the UK. So probably around 1965, I had imported copies of the Who, the Pretty Things, the Yardbirds, even Jimi Hendrix. I had it in '67, and I was playing this music at my high school, and all the guitar players came and were like, "What is this music?" And they they were all really flipping out over the Yardbirds, and that was really the band I really liked the most. And I just could not figure out how I was going to connect to that. I couldn't play guitar, so how was I going to connect to that? And again, I was walking through Waikiki, and I found some OAG guides, which some travel agency had thrown in the bin. I picked those up, and I had a knack for booking travel. I would fantasize going to all these places in the world. And then I walked into a travel company one day and told them how I could do this whole routing first class cheaper than economy. And the guy offered me a job. I was 15. And in 1 year, I was offered a free ticket anywhere in the world first class. Subsequent to that, the Rolling Stones played Hawaii, and I snuck out. Brian Jones was in the band. I got to see the real deal. And 8,000 people losing their minds, flash bulbs, girls screaming. I could not figure out what this was all about, but I knew I had to be part of it. So my first class ticket when I was 16, I went to London, right in the middle of it all. And by synchronistic chance, the people whose house I was staying at looked after a photographer's studio in London where they were shooting the movie Blow Up, which had the Yardbirds in it. And that's when the bell went off in my head. I could be a photographer. That I want to do. So I went back to Hawaii. I caddied for 6 months, carrying all the bags, got my money to buy my cameras. And then, okay, now how am I going to get to where I want to go? And then I discovered in the summer of 1968, Bill Graham had booked all of these bands I wanted to see at the Fillmore. And I looked into it and discovered there was this fabulous photography school there called the San Francisco Art Institute. So I enrolled. My classmate was Annie Leibovitz. I actually knew Jan Weiner from Rolling Stone, who was the editor, and developed a relationship so I could access these concerts. And I ended up knowing Bill Graham. So the very first roll of film, the very first concert I ever photographed was Jeff Beck, 1968, The Truth Tour with Rod Stewart. And Bill Graham let me in early, so I was literally at the foot of the stage. And then I developed a friendship with Jeff, and he tipped me about a band that Jimmy Page was doing that didn't have a name. I convinced Jan Weiner to send me down to the Whiskey A Go-Go in the early January of '69 to shoot this unnamed band that no one knew about. And there weren't many people there for the first show. And I wasn't old enough to get in, but they called the hotel and Jimmy said, come on over to the Chateau Marmont. I developed a friendship with the band, turned out to be Led Zeppelin. So I have one of the first concerts that Zeppelin did in America. So in that first 6 months in San Francisco, I'd worked with Jimi Hendrix and Santana and Jethro Tull and on and on. You know, you pretty much have shot everybody, you know. So moving forward, it was very easy to access anybody else because they say, who have you worked with? I went, oh, Jimi Hendrix, Jeff Beck, Led Zeppelin. So, you know, that was it.
Yeah,
and that's how I got into it.
I'm gonna pop up. This is a scroll, everybody, of some of Robert's work, and I have that guitar. I just showed that guitar to Robert right before the show.
My first photo I ever took, right there. The very first rock photo I ever did was Jeff Beck.
It's one of the best photos. You know, these images. You know, there isn't another word. They're iconic. They've been seen over and over again by so many music lovers around the world. But you took these pictures, and that's one of my favorite pictures of Jeff Beck. And my friend Robert took. Yeah, right. And so, is there? I'm going to ask you the obvious question as you scroll by. Look at that, man. Yeah, it's just how I know you get asked this all the time. What's the secret of snapping it at the right time? What's the secret sauce?
Part of the secret is knowing when not to pull your camera out. Part of the secret is asking permission first so that the artist is comfortable and you developed a friendship and they remember that. And so you have to kind of blend in and they're relaxed with you there. And then you get those moments. And especially if you're into the music, you know where the crescendo is, you know where the break is. So you can anticipate, like Eddie Van Halen jumping, you know. I was waiting for that shot and got it, you know.
I just saw that picture of Jeff Beck with Tal, and that he's had a lot of great bands. We know that, right? He's you know, but that era with Tal was very special.
Vinnie Colaiuta,
Vinnie Colaiuta, live at Ronnie Scott's, man. Great picture of Elton John, and I think there's some pictures you took of me and Billy Gibbons that you probably have on a proof sheet somewhere. There's Slash and Robert Plant, and now this is scrolling back through again, and I'm just going to leave this up there. Is there one that got away? Is there somebody that you didn't shoot?
Well, it had a lot to do with the fact there were people I didn't want to shoot because whose music I didn't like. Back in the day, I wouldn't work with anybody whose music I didn't like. I don't understand what I was thinking, but I just didn't, you know, I avoided certain bands. But the bands that got away from me back in the day was probably The Who and Chris Cornell. And Chris Cornell, his people were reaching out to me about 6 months before he passed, asking me if I'd ever photographed him. And we were trying to set up a time for me to work with him. But I would say Chris Cornell and The Who were really the two that I missed the boat.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I was very fortunate enough. The show's about you; it's not about me. But I got really lucky in touring with Soundgarden on their first tour for the Louder Than Love album in 1989, and so we were on the road for about a year. And I didn't know, man. I didn't know what grunge was. I didn't get it. And it's like touring with the Beatles on their first, you know, you don't know what the future is about to, you don't know, with Van Halen on their first tour, you don't know what's about to happen and the mark that they were going to make. And that's what it was like for me with Soundgarden. I heard it, I understood it, but I didn't who was to predict the future and things. And he was just a kid, he was just a kid. But the other part, by the way, we can't move forward without giving a big shout out to Dave Weiderman and James Fox, the two guys responsible for you and I meeting so many years ago. And I remember, do you remember shooting Santana at DC? Okay.
Yeah.
So that particular day, Carlos had a photographer, a Japanese guy, that shot him for years and who had given me a couple of pictures, right? So you remember where my office was down in Pro Audio, where you did all of your shooting with the backdrops. So I show Carlos, he signs the pictures. And he goes, you know him? I go, yeah, man, he lives down the street. He goes, I know he lives down the street. I said, well, he's a friend and a customer. And I said, oh, okay. He said, okay. So anyway, and how cool was it for Carlos and I to turn around and have you shoot us together? It was a long line of people, but that was very special, man. And I just want to thank you for that. That was a really cool moment for me. But the ideas behind this, I have a lot because of my music background and your music background. It's a really strange thing that I've realized. I kept my UFO stuff, my conspiracy stuff, remote viewing, whatever I was researching. I didn't talk to people about it, and I wasn't comfortable with it. But what I came to find out later, like you're a perfect example of this, that musicians, is it because of, and creators and artists like yourself, is it because our minds and our consciousness work a little bit differently that we are open to this, therefore it exposes itself to us? I have musicians on the show all the time that have had experiences.
I mean, almost everybody I've worked with. Ingo helped clarify that for me. I know we're a little jumping the gun here about Ingo, but Ingo described people as having reality boxes. And some people's reality boxes are quite small. And other people's might be three-sided, and they have an open-ended reality box. And then there are people like musicians, poets, artists that don't really have a reality box. They're open to everything. They're doing a form of channeling. They don't realize it. I mean, I talked to Jimi Hendrix about it. I talked to Stevie Ray. I've talked to everybody. It's like, where is this coming from? And they have no clue. They always point up. Where did that idea come from? Bob Dylan, he couldn't even explain where this was coming from. So it was like a form of, automatic writing, for an old term back from the day. But I find that musicians and artists, photographers, creative people are open to it. And I think some people whose reality boxes are quite small, they may encounter something and they refuse to acknowledge it or refuse to even see it, or perhaps not even see it at all because their reality box doesn't allow them to.
Well, okay. I've always thought Jimi Hendrix was an alien, by the way. And you know what? What's weird?
By the way.
There are a few, not a few, that's a wrong way to put it, but there are musicians and not necessarily musicians specifically, but there are people that have shown up on this planet for a very brief moment in time and were different and changed things and then left us.
Yep.
Right? It's like really, really weird. Yeah. Hendrix is a perfect example of that. David Bowie got to hang around a little bit, but he, or Michael Jackson, Elvis Presley, you know what I mean? Leonardo da Vinci. It doesn't, that come and you can look at the world before them and after. And I always wonder if that was intentional.
I wouldn't doubt it. I think you start getting into the NHI area there and how it influences people. I have always been a strong believer that musicians have a lot more power than politicians. I think Nelson Mandela got freed a lot more by the actions of Bono, U2, and people like that every night, would go on about it. The rainforests that Sting made available, Elton John with AIDS. There's so many things that musicians have affected change for the better of mankind, I think, to a great extent. And, I being in Hawaii, it was a unique situation because you weren't around publicists. And I actually used to get hired by the record company to look after some of the bands. So I had Led Zeppelin for 10 days. I mean, we went out to dinner, Buzz's Steak and Lobster. I took them over to K-Poi to do an interview with the radio DJs there. I told them about Screamin' Jay Hawkins playing out at a strip club near the airport. But we had a lot of time to talk. I talked to Jimmy Page quite a bit back in the day about his ownership of the biggest occult bookstore in London at the time. And Jimi Hendrix was, he believed he was from some other place, not here. I think his grandmother was Cherokee Indian, so there was the shamanistic side of him. I have found a lot of these guys, and then, and I still have. I've had conversations for years with a lot of guys about this. Dave Navarro and I have talked forever about this subject. Even Tom Geelong. I actually helped Tom connect to some of these people that he knows now. I have emails back and forth with him in 2011 where I'm telling him to get a hold of Put Off and get a hold of George Knapp and all of that. I've saved all those. But they've affected change. Jeff Beck. I mean, what universe was he playing from? I mean, it's just unbelievable what you would see him, and then it would be like, Steve Lukather. He's a good buddy. Another great experiencer. Tremendous UFO sightings Lukather's had. I don't know if you've ever had him on the show, but he would be hysterical.
Yeah, he's another. When you have somebody like Jeff Beck, Hendrix, or Eddie Van Halen, where they were completely unique, right? They weren't pulling off of a palette of something else. And even though, Robert, they will list their influences, right? Well, yes, there was this, but the style of and there are many other players too as well, but sure, Jeff Beck is one of those. He's one of the perfect examples of this. You watch him play and you're like, where is this coming from? I mean, that's a whole nother, and you have to wonder, maybe it is channeled. Maybe there is this, form of meditation or a zone that only they understand and they tap into it. When you see some of those great guys like Beck, Doug Aldrich is a really good example of this. Yeah. I was recording Doug one day. He's chewing gum, playing this guitar solo. We record it, and I'm watching Robert. Right. I'm like, that's the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life, right? That's it right there. And he goes, let's do it again. And I go, what? And he, no. And he goes, oh, man, I don't remember what I played. What? And that's what I'm talking about, right? They're tapping into something that most of us don't understand, right?
That's why Jeff Beck was very hard to record. A lot of producers had a hard time because he would play something and they'd say, okay, can you do that again? He couldn't do it. Every time he would do a take, it'd be completely different. So what they'd end up doing is just recording them all, patch it together, put the solos in, and he'd learn his solo for the tour. Guitar Shop was done like that album. He pretty much, they had to put the different solos because he just kept playing and each thing was different, And I got to
Oh,
watch him record, and I got to, watch him rehearse. I got to watch him at his house play. I think the most important thing in my relationship with Jeff was the very first day we hung out. He said to me, "Do you play guitar?" And I said, "No." He said, "Do you want to play guitar?" I said, "No." He said, "I think we could be friends." So we didn't talk a lot about guitar, and I'd always pretend I was annoyed. We'd be watching the television. He'd say, "Well, I'm going to play the guitar over here." I'm like, "Yeah, go on," and then I'm turning on the corner of my eye watching him play as we're watching the TV, and then eventually he'd turn the TV off and then play louder, and it was amazing to watch that process.
Okay, we're going to get back to UFOs, everybody. I promise. I have to ask you this though. Do you have? This is a tough question. Do you have a favorite Jeff Beck album?
Well, I'm partial to Guitar Shop because I knew everybody so well. Terry Bozzio was a longtime friend, and I did that tour in '89. They did the Guitar Shop tour with Stevie Ray Vaughan. I really liked that album, and there's a lot of stuff on there at the time everybody thought was pretty wild, and people are just now coming around to it. Obviously, Truth, the very first record, was mind-numbing. And the thing about my generation and your generation, I mean, there's about a decade or more between us, Jimmy, is that I feel like I got to see the archetypes. There hadn't been anybody like all of these people had come along before. And then after around 2000, 2005, I haven't seen a lot of new archetypes. Everybody is derivative. They're going back to that music from 68 to 95, and you see the bands like I work with Def Leppard and Journey, and my wife is also a rock and roll photographer, so we do this together, and it's like all that music that I listened to 50 years ago is still on the radio. Down here in New Zealand, I mean, you can't. It's all you hear.
By the way, Robert is coming to us live from New Zealand. I forgot to mention that. Truth is up there for me. I'm partial to the Orange album with Bob Tench and Max Middleton, and who was on drums on that? Was that Cozy Powell?
Cozy Powell.
Yeah, it was Cozy. Yeah. Man, that's. But I still like Blow by Blow. I still like Wired. Yeah. Those very, very. You can't. It's they're all just about perfect albums.
I can tell you a good story. I got to thank Dave Weiderman at the Guitar Center because I walked in the door there in 1985 looking to trade some photos from some gear, and it was the first time they'd ever done a rock walk induction. And so I was watching Eddie Van Halen and Les Paul, and I think Robin Williams was jumping around, and that's when I developed the friendship. And eventually, Ray Shearer made me a co-director with Dave Weiderman, and Dave and I ran that thing for 35 years. And so through the rock walk, David and I could fantasize who we wanted to come in there. So about half the people that are in there were friends of mine that I would call up and get them to do it. But one of the people was George Martin. And
I was there for that. Yeah. Okay. So check this out. I don't tell this story often, but here's my George Martin story. That was an awesome day. So the Beatles had just released some remastered thing, and I went down the street and I bought the CD. And my office. So George comes in. And we're doing the thing, and we went into one of the studios. You remember down there we had like 5 studios, right? In pro audio, and so George and I go in. He wanted to see something, and I'm sitting here with George Martin. But here's the thing: so we put in some music, and I pushed up the faders, and he grabs another fader. And he pushes up, and our hands are next to each other. Right? I'm sitting next to George Martin at a console. But here's the thing. Here's the trippy thing. His hands, I got long fingers. Yeah, his fingers were like this long. Yeah. His thumb had an extra joint. Yeah. And I'm looking, I go, dude, and he holds up his hand and he puts it next to mine. It was like this. I go, that's how you did it.
Yeah,
You had
you
an
go down to the
extra
rock
inch of
walk, you can
fingers.
see it. Put your hands down there, and he's got the biggest hands in rock walk. I mean, it's like
Yeah. Oh,
outrageous.
you know what? I forgot about that. We did the handprints. Yeah, I need to go
That's
back
right.
and check that out. Yeah.
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 And
George
then,
Martin.
and then as I got to know him, I asked him about Blow by Blow. And he said if he hadn't taken that album away from Jeff, he'd still be mixing it. He had to actually take the album away and give it to the label. He just wasn't happy with all the orchestration and all of that on there. So that was a breakthrough album for Jeff, but one that it was unusual, that he just was never satisfied with it. And maybe Wired was more like what Jeff wanted to do,
Yeah, he
with George.
signed one or maybe both of those. I've got them packed away. But yeah, that was just, I have a few seminal moments in my life. But
Yeah.
because of you, I was able to sit next to, Sir George Martin, and put my
Yeah, and
hands
then
next to his on the console.
we stayed in touch, and he really liked my Led Zeppelin Honolulu airport shot, and he asked me to donate it to his charity at Abbey Road. And Robert Plant signed it for the charity. And I think we got $7,500 for it. But George invited my wife, Marianne Billum, who's also an awesome photographer, to London, to Abbey Road. And we were in there for this cancer auction, but in comes Cynthia Lennon and Pete Best and a whole lot of the things around the Beatles. And I was like, oh my God, this is just unbelievable. Yeah, it was an interesting day. And get the tour of Abbey Road by George Martin.
Yeah, that doesn't suck. That doesn't suck. Okay, everybody, look, Robert and I are old friends, and we could tell rock and roll stories all night. We'll do that on another show. We'll just sit and do music all night. Take me back, Robert, to Hawaii and your first. You say NHI, right? Non-human intelligence. Take me back to your first contact. What happened?
Well, like I said, my father was a minister, and we actually at one point lived in the church. There was a parsonage attached to it, and it was next to a Buddhist temple. And my room was adjacent to the bishop of the Buddhist temple. So all night long, I'd hear all this chanting, and they would be burning incense. And this was all quite wild for me as a child. But we moved shortly thereafter to an area in Manoa Valley up behind the University of Hawaii. And my bedroom was facing to a cliff, and every night I could hear these people talking, and they were piling rocks, and the rocks would roll down and hit the side of the wall. And it really became weird. And I couldn't understand what they were saying. And I'd bring my parents into the room, and they couldn't hear it. And I'm like, wait, you can't hear that? And it was going on. I went out with a flashlight. I could sort of see where it was rolling through, yet nothing was there. So night after night, this was going on. And eventually I knew it didn't hurt me. I just sort of let it happen. And then several years later, when I entered high school, I met a pure Hawaiian friend, and who plays significantly in all of these stories that I'm going to tell. But he came over, and we were talking late at night, and he could hear them. He could hear the noise. And he goes, what is that? I said, you hear that? He said, yes. And he says, well, they're speaking an ancient form of Hawaiian. So the next day we went up to Bishop Museum. He talked to the curator up there. They looked at some maps. It turns out that the foundation stones of the house where we were living was built out of the stones of a heiau, which was a forbidden sort of sacred spot in the Hawaiian culture. And what we were hearing was a 200-year-old construction of this heiau. And I mean, it's like, this was just my first brush with being able to hear or perceive this. And I had another person as a witness. And then together we would hang out, and we would start to see a lot of phenomena. We were able to watch the Hawaiian Death March. We were able to see orbs. I mean, all of this as a kid. We used to get in the car, get binoculars, and drive. But, I always had witnesses with me. And, and there was Hawaiian spiritual culture around the phenomena. I mean, they knew what it was. Normally, haoles or white people didn't see this stuff. I was never sure why I could, but eventually it led to one of the most profound things that affected my life to this day. is that my buddy and I decided to go camping late at night out at Hanauma Bay, about 8 miles, 10 miles from Honolulu, a very picturesque crescent beach. I think Elvis shot a lot of movies down there. And on the right side, there's a mountain you can go over, and we camped up there. And around 9 o'clock at night, starlit, no clouds, absolute calm sea. You could see the other islands in the background. The ocean lit up with about 3 or 4 incredibly fast-moving lights. They were just zipping through the water. It was like bees, but just moving so fast. And I had no frame of reference, and neither did he, as to what we were looking at. And
How
the
big
only
were they?
frame I had was Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. I thought, well, these must be submarines with headlights. We couldn't figure it out. And then suddenly, all of the lights rose out of the water and flew off into different directions. And the next thing we remember is 3 o'clock in the morning, we were walking 5 miles away home. No recollection of what happened between 9 and 3 in the morning. We didn't talk about it between us. We just went home. We just didn't say anything about it. And then I left Hawaii around 1980. This would have been around late 60s that this happened. And I happened to be in LA, and I saw an LA Weekly. And on the cover or inside, they had an ad for a UFO convention at the LA airport. And suddenly that memory came back to me. I called my friend in Denver. He was living up there then, and it all came back to him. And we totally were just like, we saw that, we witnessed it. And it's absolutely everything that people are witnessing now. The other day, I had a phone call with Admiral Tim Galloway. I think he's very big in the news right now. And I recounted my story to Tim because he's in charge of a whole lot of the underwater things that are going on with the Navy. And it lines up to things that they're seeing. And I said, well, there certainly wasn't, drones in 1967 or whenever this was. And it just matched the same phenomena that was going on. So that whole time I was in Hawaii, I was in constant bumping into really what I would call a spiritual NHI, because it usually is associated something to do with the Hawaiian culture.
Yeah, what you said, I want to circle back to you said something really quick. You said, I don't know why white people can't see it.
Well, it wasn't a lot
Right.
of people that were
Well,
Howleys,
you know what
they
I
call
mean?
them there.
But you know what I think that's a very interesting point. There are lots of indigenous cultures around the world, Robert,
Absolutely.
as you know, that have their, but not everybody shares the same experience. And a lot has been going on over in Hawaii. And like you said, these rocks are falling. Nobody else can hear it but yourself. Why do you think you were able to see and hear these things?
I think I was at a point in my life, because of the religious overlay, as to understanding if this was good and evil, spirits, all of the things that I was hearing about in the church from missionaries that would come through and talk about, really wild experiences they had in Africa or in Sri Lanka or Bali. And it just tweaked my interest. And so I needed to know whether there was a good or evil, or whether this was all real or just imaginary. So part of my thing of being a photographer, it allowed me to go to over 100 countries. So I was able to go to some very remote places and to witness firsthand entire villages becoming possessed by demons and charging at each other with knives, hitting each other in the throat, and the knife being unable to enter. And then in Singapore and in India and Kuala Lumpur, they have this thing called Thai Pusang. And there are hundreds and hundreds of people, mostly Indians, that pierce themselves with knives and tridents and hit their backs with axes. There's absolutely no pain. They absolutely don't bleed. And they march up into the temple. And, if something like that went on in America, it'd be on the front page, like what on earth is going on? But the indigenous culture, they experience this in everyday life. They live with it, right? And particularly in Bali, when I went to Bali, it was very early days. And I was allowed to go in to watch that ceremony, but they made me wear a special sash because they said, if you don't wear this sash or if it comes off, you could be killed. But I stood in the middle of this. And so I knew that this was real. But it started with them sort of spinning their head. And then I felt like, well, this could be a Metallica concert. You know, I mean, it looked like headbangers because they would get into a trance by spinning their heads. And then to witness that firsthand let me know that there was a live, real spiritual phenomenon, both positive and negative. You know, because
this clash of careers of yours, where you're off doing one thing, right? You're making a living, you're paying the rent, right? Okay, so you're paying the bill, but everything starts to you got deep into the UFO world and culture with some pretty heavy figures, not only UFOs but Stargate and things. How did that happen?
Well, interestingly enough, it started with, I don't know if you remember the band Skinny Puppy.
Of course.
Ogre, a Canadian industrial band. We were, Ogre and I used to talk all of this stuff, and we decided we wanted to create a game like Myst, which was very popular at the time. And we were going to do like a kind of a conspiracy UFO weird game where you could wander around the world, like go into Lawrence, Kansas to the gates of hell, or go into Plant 4 at Palmdale, or go into Area 51. So we started, imagining all of this, and he got money from Rick Rubin. And this was right at the dawn of the computer thing, really, where computers were becoming a thing. And they hired a guy to train me to be able to do a computer. And at that time, everything was a news group. You didn't have www at that point. It was like you'd go to a news group and you could read all these different topical things. So Ogre and I decided we were going to reach out to some of these names that I had heard about. Colonel John Alexander, Hal Puthoff, Ed Dames, all of this. And so we sent out, I guess, I don't know how we did it back then. It wasn't email, but it was maybe a text message or a phone call. And the first thing that happened is I got a response from Ed Dames, of all people. And Ed, my fax machine spewed out all of this data saying, I've remote viewed you. You're going to make the biggest change to remote viewing. I need to meet you. I'm going to train you free. I mean, I was like, wow, what is all of this? So anyway, Ed flew out to LA. I met him, and he asked me if I would post something on a news group called Ed Dames Sets the Record Straight.
That was on Paranet.
It was some weird thing. I didn't even know what I did.
It was Paranet. Anyway, it was Paranet. I remember.
So I posted it, and apparently there were keywords in there that weren't in the public domain at the time. And suddenly I get contacted by Colonel John Alexander. I get contacted by Paul Smith. What are you doing? Why have you posted this thing? And I said, well, Ed Dames asked me to do it. And so they called Ed, and Ed denied that he did it. He said it was an overzealous PR agent. So I then befriended Colonel John Alexander, and we started to talk. And then he realized I wasn't up to anything. And he said, so you're a photographer, right? I said, yeah. He says, bring your camera. I'll meet you in LA in a week. And I actually met him in an underground base in East LA. It was like every conspiracy fantasy that one could have. And going deep underground into this complex, and underneath were all of these television screens, and people were listening and watching things. And, there was desks for the CIA, for the FBI, for home. I mean, it was a pretty crazy thing. And that's where I met him. And so the next day I started taking pictures for a book he was working on about non-lethals. And then he asked me if I wanted to do a website. And he had a book called The Warrior's Path, I think it was called, or The Warrior's Edge, one of those. And he asked me to photograph these people. And he said, I'm going to let you photograph some very key people here. You can spend an hour with them. You can ask them anything you want. And if they say they can't answer the question, they won't lie to you. They'll just say, okay, no. So I basically shot all the NIDS guys, which is where I met them all. So I became
Mhm.
friends with Eric Davis, and I became friends with Put Off and Valet and John Mack. I met them all, and then he gave me a whole list of other people, and then this just kept expanding, and I was meeting all of these key people, and then John said, well, what can I do to help you? I says, well, I want to meet Ingo Swann. And he says, well, that won't happen. He doesn't like to meet anybody. And so that didn't happen. But then I was on my way to go to New York to photograph Les Paul. I know he lived there. So I said, call him and tell him I'm going to be in New York and ask him if he could meet me. So he called him and he said yes. And so that's where I developed that friendship. It was quite random. And it was just the craziest story, because when I met him, he was outside of the stoop of his house and smoking a cigar. And he said, okay, what do you want to know? I said, what do you mean? He says, oh, everybody that wants to talk to me, they want to know when they're going to die, or, all of this nonsense. So let's get it out of the way and you can go on your way. And I said, well, do psychics ever lose their keys? That was my question. And that made him laugh. And he couldn't stop laughing. And so I had a backpack with me, and he said, well, listen, in your backpack, there's 3 objects. There's a camera, there's a bottle of white wine, and there's a bottle of red wine. You don't know which I like, but you can only bring one of those things out of the bag, and that's the red wine. So he invited me into his house for 40 minutes. We drank the bottle. He opened 3 or 4 more bottles. And that's where it all started to happen. We really hit it off, and then we went to dinner around the corner, and Quentin Crisp came in, famous writer, and he walked up, and Ingo introduced me, and he walked on, and then Ingo said, oh, poor Quentin, he's going to die soon. I said, why? He said, he has no aura. I went, what? He said, he has no aura. Oh, okay. A couple of days later, Quentin Crisp died. So that was my introduction to Ingo. So
All because this is what's crazy.
Yeah.
Because of Skinny Puppy and Rick Rubin.
That's exactly.
That is nuts.
Yeah.
That's
I've
crazy.
discovered that a lot of these guys are actually big fans of Rick Clapton, and I helped him get an amp, and Jay Stratton, whose name is in the news a lot, he was the main boss over there. He's he plays guitar. And I was talking to him on chat. I said, well, what is that guitar behind you? He said, oh, Tom DeLonge gave me that. And then it was his birthday the other day. And I said, well, I hope you got a guitar for your birthday. And he said, yes, Sam Ash was wishing the same thing.
So now let's back up a step here. That crowd, you called them the NIDS crowd. It's kind of the circle. Yeah, let's go with NIDS. I guess that everybody knows.
I mean, they were because there were people there that were well into consciousness. But I got to back up even further. Right after I did that thing with Ed Dames, he said, what is it that you can do for me that will change the face of remote viewing? And I thought about it, and I said, you know who Art Bell is? He says, what's an Art Bell? I says, well, he's on the radio. He's got about 10, 15 million people that listen to him. You need to go on that show. So he said, well, can you arrange that? And I made a phone call, and Ed went on that night. And that became the face of remote viewing for the longest time, as Major Dames and the Dr. Doom and, the Kill Shot and all of that business, right?
Here's the crazy part about that. I would say, first off, 6 degrees of separation, but it's not. It's really like 2. It's 2 or 3 degrees. So many people come up to me. I hosted Coast for 7 years. Yeah. And so many people come up to me and they'll go, Jimmy, you were good. You were good. It was Ed Dames, right? Oh, I did and you are the person that introduced Ed to Art Bell, some of the best radio, by the way, that was ever done in the history of the world. But you and I are friends at that time.
Yeah.
And I would go on to work with Art and, of course, Coast to Coast and Ed Dames. And you do it's the world is a very small place,
It
Robert.
is. And, and then I actually in 2005 moved to Las Vegas. So, I saw John Alexander regularly, and we would do all sorts of adventures together, including going to the backside of Area 51 with third generation night vision goggles and things. But I met so many cool people. And then IRVA was formed in Alamogordo, New Mexico, and I got invited to go back there at their very first meeting, which is the International Remote Viewing Association. So I was there at Lynn Buchanan's house, and I photographed it. I have these amazing photographs of all of these people together, but for some reason I didn't like the way Targ was sitting and where Putoff was, so I moved them next to each other, and everybody gasped because apparently there had been a huge falling out for years between Putoff and Targ, and they had kind of reunited and said hello to each other while I was doing the photo. And then I developed a really cool relationship with Hal, and then my wife and I developed an even better one with he and his wife, and we would often go to dinner. But sometimes I would call Hal and say, I'm coming to Austin. I'm bringing several good bottles of Italian wine. I'm going to get you drunk, and I'm going to ask you everything about UFOs. And he'd write back, I love Italian wine. So I've had many a night with Hal and Ingo and quite a few people over copious amounts of beautiful wine, talking about the whole thing, basically.
Yeah,
So,
what's your takeaway when you look at Kit Green or Putoff or Jacques, even Targ? Russell goes on that list too as well, and John Alexander. Are these guys? Do they know the secret, or are they still one step removed?
I'd say that those guys, you'll always see the same people involved in all these different iterations of things that come along, from MIDS to, to what Tom DeLonge did, to, what Lou Elizondo was doing. You'll see these names recur, particularly Valet and Putoff. And I think they know more than most and anybody, but, obviously there are these programs called USAPs. I don't know if
SAPs.
It's an unacknowledged, wave program. So these folks, no matter what, will lie, or they will do whatever they have to do to deny the existence or any information about said program. So, but I have a pretty good holistic idea of what they know, and that is the searchers are still searching. I don't think they can put their finger on it yet. So if they can't put their finger on it, what are these stovepiped closed groups doing, without those open-ended reality boxes, with the technology or that information? So it's kind of interesting to watch because, I've never been in the military. I don't hold any security clearances, but John Alexander actually got me to be a member of AFIO Las Vegas, which is the American Federation of Intelligence Officers. And I would go to the meetings out at Nellis Air Force Beach. I met, a lot of the people in charge of security at Area 51, pilots. I met all the people out there, key people. You would never ask them about their job. They all assume that you had some kind of job that you couldn't talk about. But I managed to get a tour of the test site with 200 CIA officers one time. That was pretty fun. But the thing that's interesting is that, I cornered one of the key guys out at 51, and I said, look, I got to ask you a question. I want to be the first photographer to shoot a rock star at the runway on Area 51. And he looked at me for a long time, and then he said, you know what? If we were going to let anybody, it would probably be you. So that's as close as I got to him. I was going to shoot Dave Navarro out there if they would have let me.
I'd let you shoot me out there.
Yeah.
So, did when you're at a secret location like that, and without, I was going to mention something that happened to me a couple of weeks ago with security. When you bring up the subject, are aliens or UFO or things like that? Are they discussed, or are they discussed? If they are, is it in jest?
You can talk to people theoretically. You could say theoretically, if so-and-so, if a UFO crashed and there was an alien, would so-and-so have done the autopsy? And they would say, oh, theoretically, he probably would have. And if so-and-so, would he have done that? Well, theoretically, that would probably be the guy they'd call. So you could kind of talk like that, but I know better than to ask some of my friends like Eric Davis. I never say to Eric Davis, hey, is the Eric Davis Wilson memo real? I don't need to ask. You know what I mean? We talk about other things because he can't answer that question. He's on security clearances that you'd get fired, if he said anything, So,
man,
but
I'd ask him.
I enjoy it because you got, I think you have to. I think the important thing that UFO researchers need to do is to stay incredibly agnostic, because things keep changing. And so one minute it could be aliens, the next minute it could be, NHI that lives under the Antarctica. I mean, it's quite confusing. But Ingo actually said, follow the Navy, and that's where you need to look. And it's bigger than any one nation state. So those are the two clues he gave me.
I got, you know where I live. So I'm out goofing around on my Harley, and I get up into Edwards Air Force Base, where this road cuts the dry lake bed in half. It's a public road that goes through the Air Force Base, right? So I'm out there, and I got to clean the bugs off my visor. And I pull over, and I don't know, something came over me. I start taking selfies, and they rolled up on me, and I didn't even see them.
Yeah, they have
right.
Motion sensors, they have all sorts of activity. Yeah.
Well, I asked him. I said, "Where were you guys?" And he goes, "Man, we were right up there on that hill on patrol."
Yeah.
And I was like, really? And I didn't see anyway. So while they were running, my ID and taking pictures of me and stuff, I asked the younger guy of the two, said, see any aliens? And he goes, man, he goes, I would love to. Yeah. He goes, everybody's talking about it. It's all, that Edwards has got this and that, but I haven't seen anything. I said, would you tell me? And he goes, no, I wouldn't, but I'm just letting you know. I haven't seen anything. So that's why I was asking, if you're out at Area 51, what do you do with a, security guy? Well, you see any aliens? I think I would. I would add. Just as they're going to say no. They're going to say no.
I can tell you a story that happened to my wife and I. We used to go out to the area by, I used to know the owners of the Little Alien. So we went out one night and we were parked at the black mailbox, which is white. And a guy pulls up in a Cadillac convertible. And he's a doctor or something. And he tells me he's going to drive the 19-mile road up there and get in there and look at what's going on. I'm like, well, I wouldn't do that if I were you. I'd stay right here. Well, anyway, he took off. And then about 20, 30 minutes later, he comes back and he's all freaked out. He said a little blue wedge-shaped UFO chased him down the road. And, he came there and he was really shook up. And then suddenly out of the darkness came these security guys with machine guns and balaclavas descending on him and our car. And they were giving him a bad time. And then they came over to my wife and I, and they said, so what are you doing here? And I said, well, I'm watching my tax dollars fly by. And he said, well, look, when you people come out here, it can cost up to $600,000 to cancel the tests. And we need to do these tests. And I said, why? I mean, why can't I be here? And what's the importance? And he said, read your Bible. And I went, what? I said, which Bible? Because I knew all the guards were Mormons. And I said, the Book of Mormon or which one? He said, well, the one where in the Book of Revelations, the United States fights China. And I went, oh, okay.
Wow.
So that's as close as I got to any kind of admonition out of those folks,
Now, what do you make of, we need to take a break. When we come back, let's pick this up with Ingo Swann. Let's set up for our return. The gift of remote viewing. You brought up Paul Smith, right? Paul Smith, by the way, in my opinion, one of the coolest people on the planet.
Yeah.
That's a cool dude. That's a cool dude right there.
Yeah.
It makes me laugh. Very smart. I've had some crazy dinners with him, and very cool guy. But he's got the gift.
He does.
And are you able to remote view?
I decided not to ever do it. Ingo trained Paul Smith, and then Angela Thompson Smith, who lives in Vegas, whose husband at the time was Paul Smith's brother. She trained my wife. My wife is a trained remote viewer. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to, I have a hard enough time dealing with reality as it is. I didn't want to know anything about the future.
I was sitting with Jacques. This was 6 months ago, and we were up late one night, just the two of us. And he had told me, I didn't know this about him, but he said, going back to 1970, at Stanford, and I got all wrapped up into, what they were doing up there. He said,
yeah,
I learned a remote view and I got pretty good. I go,
Ingo
you can remote view. Yeah. He goes, yeah, I just got out of it. He said, but I did some things. And he said, you too, Jimmy, can remote view. I go, Jacques, you remote viewed? And he goes, yeah. And he told me a couple of stories.
Yeah. And most people that are creative can easily learn it. Anybody can learn it. Whether you'd be good at it is another story. But when you first do it, the results are amazing. You blow your own mind. In fact, there was a guy named Jim Schnabel who wrote a book about remote viewing, and they sent him to interview Ingo, and Ingo knew he was going to try to discredit the whole thing. So Ingo said, well, look, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm going to train you. You're going to remote view, and then you're going to write about remote viewing. So he wrote an entirely different book.
All because of Skinny Puppy. Or you can back up, all because of a roll of film. See, this all, if one thing changes, Robert, in your life, one little thing, none of this happens.
Yeah, well, synchronicity is a big thing. And Ingo, I don't know if we have the time, but Ingo told me that synchronicity is a very important part of your signal line in life. And the signal is very, very subtle because 99% of everything around you is noise, but the signal is what you need to be on. And you're on your signal line when there's a huge amount of synchronicity in your life. And that was the advice I got from Ingo. The importance of synchronicity.
Right. Stay right there, Robert. We'll be right back. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Stay with us. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get your alerts and access to over 2,000 videos. Click that subscribe button. Get the Fade to Black official podcast. 2,000 episodes, all of them commercial free for just $2 a month. This is Jimmy Church. Please visit and explore Egypt this October 3rd through the 14th, 2024 with Billy, Elizabeth, myself, and very special guest and the #1 podcaster in the world, Sean Kelly. It's simple to do. Just go to forbiddenknowledge.com and click on upcoming tours, or click on the link below. We'll see you there. Watch Into the Vortex on Gaia TV. It's Fade to Black for the screen. Simple to do. Go to Gaia.com, search Jimmy Church, or click on the link below. Follow Fade to Black on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Get all of the show updates every single day. It's now called X, but who cares? How you doing? Jimmy Church here. Special announcement. Get your Fade to Black t-shirts. That's right. Help support the show. Help support everything that we do over here. We've got 2 t-shirts. We've got 2 ways to get them. And right now, if you get a Game Changer membership for a limited time, you will get Fade to Black Blend coffee with your Game Changer membership. That's right. We have 2 t-shirts. We have the original, the classic Fade to Black t-shirt. You know you want one. Post a picture, send it to us. We'll put it in our Fade to Black gallery. And we've got the new official Fade to Black t-shirt drawn by Michael Oming. 2 t-shirts, 2 ways to get them. Get yours today. Everything is in stock. Everything gets autographed. Everything includes shipping. And you're going to get a tracking number. And with a Game Changer membership, you get an email to me. You get unlimited commercial-free downloads of the show. Those are uploaded every single night after the show to the website. So don't delay. Get your Fade to Black t-shirt today. Go Backley Tappy. Go to jimmychurchradio.com and become a Fadernaut. Get a membership. That's right. Everything is commercial free. You have access to downloads, and you get to call yourself a Fadernaut. River Moon Coffee, makers of the Fade to Black blend. Truly the best coffee on planet Earth. Just visit rivermoonwellness.com or their Amazon store. It's all simple to do. You can check out the Fade to Black blend, the Game Changer blend, or any of their Black Moon Wellness products. It's the only coffee I drink. It is the best, and it's Doc. Again, rivermoonwellness.com. All right, welcome back, Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, our guest, photographer Robert M. Knight. And now, rock photographer, UFO, UAP, paranormal researcher as well, and the secret life we lead, Robert. And now, you've got a couple of very interesting stories with Ingo. Let's jump into them well, I don't even know where to start. I'll let you tell the story, but Ingo, I would say today is enigma the right word?
I think a lot of people see him as an enigma because I think a lot of people didn't believe his ability at the time and the things that he did. And 400 of the targets that he did with Hal and Kit, are still classified to this day. And, Joe McMonagle, he had the number 001. He calls himself the first remote viewer. And Ingo laughed because he said, well, did Joe know that my number was 007? He was 007. So that they would just not tell that they would not tell the client, which was the CIA in most cases, which remote viewer did what. They would just identify him by a number, like remote viewer 001 did this, remote viewer 007 did this. There was some, they just, they didn't want to poison the pool, as it were, because they were doing some pretty interesting things there.
And
back to Valet, Ingo and Valet met each other up at Stanford, and they met each other while he was developing remote viewing up there, and he was stuck because they couldn't figure out how to get people to a particular target. And at the same time, Valet had developed the www concept, and he helped work on the mouse, and he was part of ARPANET. And so he said to Ingo, you need to have a physical address. You've got to put an address for people to go to. So they used to use coordinates. Well, then the people at the CIA thought that maybe Ingo and the other remote viewers had an eidetic memory, and they already knew by just telling them the longitude and latitude what would be there. So Valet said, well, just use arbitrary numbers. So Valet played a very key role in the development of Ingo's protocols for remote viewing. Let's just put it that way. And then once Ingo had those, they were able to train people like Paul Smith and other folks over at Fort Meade with this ability, and so that went on, it's sort of like the UFO programs that get funded, then unfunded. They say, oh, well, there was nothing to it. Well, remote viewing was like that. It kept getting funded, and then another group would fund it, and then they said, oh, well, it never amounted to anything, so it went away. Well, it didn't really go away. It just went dark. And I actually was approached by people in the Pentagon if I actually knew any good remote viewers that had all their tickets, which means all their security clearances. And I actually knew one. In fact, he was one of the best remote viewers alive, even to this day. And he was trained by Ingo. And they asked me to meet them just outside the Pentagon. And then they took me to dinner with a whole bunch of Navy guys, really big, burly Navy guys at this seafood restaurant in Crystal City. And they were asking me a lot of questions about remote viewing and this and this and this. And so I gave them the name of the guy. And I said, so like, who are you guys? And they said, oh, we're SEAL Team 6. Not long later, they took out bin Laden. So I don't know the connection if they were using remote viewing, but they were asking. And my guy at the Pentagon, they were looking for a name. So I gave him somebody who had his tickets.
You shared a story with me, and I don't want to mess it up with you and Ingo that went down many years ago. Can you share that with us?
Does it have to do with the book Penetration?
I think I'd have to go back.
Well, yeah. Well, this is probably one of the more crazy stories because it actually relates to you and I. So Ingo wrote this book called Penetration, which was about how he was taken with a blindfold and put on a private jet, and he flew for about 5 or 6 hours to a remote location, which he knew immediately when he landed where it was, which was Alaska. And he was escorted by these two guys that looked like genetic twins. And he was taken out by a lake, and he was told to sit there. And then something was going to happen, and then they were going to debrief him on what he thought he saw. So after about 40 minutes, this sort of mist formed over the lake, and then a UFO suddenly was there, just appeared, didn't fly there. It just came out of a single point of light to a large one, and it was sucking up water out of this lake. And then I think it sensed that Ingo and these folks were there, and it started to send laser beams throughout the area, and it was knocking birds out of trees and all sorts of strange things. So Ingo took off running, hurt his ankle, got into the, back on the plane, flew back, got debriefed, and said, don't ever do that again. And then in the book, several years later, he had come to LA, and he was seeing some friends, and he was going to cook them dinner, and he stopped at a grocery store, and he went into the grocery store, and there were these two twins. And he's like, wait, what are they doing here? And suddenly he saw this unbelievably good-looking woman, and he knew through telepathy, he had a really strong sense of telepathy, that she was an alien. In his mind, she was an alien, and they were with her. And they changed eye contact, and Ingo became very frightened of her and got the hell out of there. So a lot of people questioned this story. And so Ingo and I spent 3 days in LA looking for that market. Well, guess where it ended up being? Next door to Guitar Center. It was Rock and Roll Ralph's.
Rock and Roll Ralph's.
Yeah. And you go in there at 2 o'clock in the morning and you will definitely see aliens walking around.
I've seen a few aliens at Rock and Roll Ralph's.
Yeah.
And I remember you telling me this story, and you're right about that. It's really weird how small the world is, and Rock and Roll Ralph's. So it's so funny that is the name. That if you were there, you know exactly what we're talking about. But next door to Guitar Center on Sunset Boulevard, on Alta Vista and Detroit and Sunset Boulevard, is a Ralph's supermarket. That's right there. But because of the neighborhood, that's where all of us lived, and that's where all of us shopped. And it was open 24 hours a day, and it became known as Rock and Roll Ralph's. And it stuck, and you say that, and just like the Denny's next door to
Rodney Bingenheimer every day,
right,
the same food.
So funny, and the Sunset Grill, right, and it's just a part of our. Now people know Sunset Grill because of the song. Sunset Grill was literally shared the driveway with Guitar Center. So all of us, we ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner there.
Yeah, it was unbelievable.
Joe, right? That was his name, right? Joe?
Yeah, and he would never sell to Ray because Ray wanted to buy it and he wouldn't sell. But, when the song came out, I mean, I don't know, somehow he came into some money and he gussied the place up. So it's kind of a little bit more high profile nowadays, but it's still there. Still go there.
We're still
and then
there.
Across the street is the Mexican restaurant where I'd meet Billy Gibbons and we would have endless margaritas and chips and guacamole. But
El Compadre.
El Compadre,
El Compadre. And who would have thought that we'll get back to UFOs in a second. The Sunset Grill. Hamburger, grilled onions, chili, an egg, and mustard and cheese.
And a lot of grease. A lot of grease.
Best hamburger in the world, man. Life-changing. A slice of egg. Friggin' Joe. God, that guy used to crack me up. Anyway, back to Ingo, though. Yeah. So, did you and Ingo go to Rock and Roll Ralph's?
We went in there. It obviously had changed when he went there. It was a long time ago, and he didn't recognize it at first. And he said, "Well, there was a driveway, and I'm not sure this is the store." And I said, "This has been remodeled," and that's what had happened because at first he didn't recognize it, but then he did. Ingo was flying back and forth from New York to LA to Las Vegas. He would stay with my wife and I. My wife and I would stay with him at his place in New York. I spent a lot of time with him, probably close to 12 years. And 5 o'clock every day in New York was cocktail hour. And so he'd always have me make his drink, and then I would get the red wine. And that's when the good stuff would happen, where he would tell me, get a hold of Bobby Inman, or, the crazy little breadcrumbs,
Right.
But he introduced me to a lot of cool people. I ended up going up to Canada to Dr. Michael Persinger, who had developed some amazing ways to verify non-verifiable remote viewing targets with Ingo. Lots of adventures, but I mean, he could be tough at times because, you could never, one time I asked him, "Do you believe in reincarnation?" And he got really mad at me. And then he calmed down. He said, "Don't ever ask me what I believe. Ask me what I know." Like, okay, sorry, but we became really good friends. And then ultimately my wife, Marianne, did a short documentary film on Ingo, and it won the Philip K. Dick Film Festival in New York, and put off and valet, and the whole bunch of guys came out and supported her, and they did a talk afterwards. So it was a pretty cool thing. And I think Jeffrey Mishloff recently aired it on his website. I think you can find it there. It's called A Life Gone Wild by on Ingo Swann. But it was probably one of the more interesting and dynamic people I have ever met, and he gave me a lot of insights to the phenomena and all these different things. But he had these uncanny abilities. He didn't allow the internet in his house, so he didn't do cell phones. He wouldn't have anything like that, and he lived below the ground for the most part in his sub basement where he painted. He was an amazing artist because he wouldn't hear everybody's thoughts, because he could read people's minds as well. So he had that sort of reprieve down there. And so we spent a lot of hours down there talking about reality boxes. And then he would suddenly say, oh, go on the internet real quick, because I had my computer there. There's been a big earthquake in the Central Valley of, near the Mexican border in California, and it's a 6.8. So I go on, and sure enough, 2 minutes ago, there was an earthquake, and they said it was a 6.6. He said, call Caltech, tell them they're wrong. And I knew people out at Caltech. And then I called them, and they said, oh, well, he's right, because we just moved it up to a 6.8. So he could spot sunspots before they would happen and tell them when they were going to go off. I mean, he had this unbelievable gift, but very interesting and complex individual.
The as things started to unravel back in December of 2017, and it's certainly what has happened since then. But as all of this started to go public, and of course, To the Stars and Tom DeLonge and Elizondo and the Navy and the Nimitz and Fravor. But behind all of that, as everything started to come out, is the circle that you have been running with. Suddenly the same names start surfacing again. It's Put Off, it's Kit Green, the whole list, all the NIDS guys, Eric Davis.
Eric Davis for sure.
Yeah. How did that make you feel that all of this was suddenly going public?
Well, it was for me old news. It was old news for me. I remember one night with Hal, and this could have been 25 years ago. We were doing some beautiful Italian wine, as we were wont to do. And I asked him, would there ever be disclosure? And he said, well, we just did something for somebody. I can't tell you too much about it, but we did a report about the impact of disclosure versus non-disclosure. And he said, we came up with 70 points. And if not all 70 points were actually to the negative of why we shouldn't do disclosure. I said, well, don't tell me about the first 69, just tell me the last one. But he wouldn't tell me at the time. But I was aware of this list. And at the Soul Conference that Gary Nolan did, Hal publicly came forward and gave a very good talk on why there is a problem with a major disclosure and what that impact could be. Because there were so many implications that it could affect world religion, it could affect the infrastructure, the stock market, it could affect global thermonuclear war, it could cause all sorts of havoc, So I think the process is going to be a slow and excruciating one, as opposed to this catastrophic disclosure, unless something lands somewhere, or Russia or Canada or one of the other countries or China decided to really come forward with what they know, which they could do. There's, So it's interesting. The jury is out. I try to sort of, like I said, I've been aware of all of this probably for a good 25 years. So none of this is new to me. And I've had many other experiences with UAPs in my life. So I know the phenomena is real. And most of those have been daylight. and I've been with other people, so that I know I'm not hallucinating. And probably one of the best ones though was in Sedona after a U2 concert, because we all went out for dinner, and we were meant to get this suite at the Alberge because that was our client, and then some VIP guest came in and took the big suite, so we ended up with smaller rooms. U2 ended up coming up there for the night after the concert, so they were in the hotel. And then the next day we were having dinner about 8 o'clock at night on this Mexican restaurant right above the main street there in Sedona, and I'm looking to the east, and suddenly there is this big UFO over the top of the mountain with 3 little ones coming down and going back up to it and just keep going down. And we watched that for like 20 minutes. And, my wife and I were having a conversation. She's like, well, maybe it's a helicopter. I'm like, yeah, but it's not making any noise. And, it was going on so long that we were able to get in the car and get around the other side of it to see how far away it was. And then all of a sudden it just gone. But I mean, a whole lot of people watched it, and then up in Ojai, my wife and I were driving down Wheeler Hot Springs, and suddenly we saw about a 15-foot silver sphere, like a Tic Tac kind of thing, right? And this was a long time ago, and it was a cloudless day with a lot of wind, and this thing was going against the wind. It had come in from the Pacific, and it was going up and down around the terrain, and we were actually chasing it in the car. I couldn't keep up with it. And we watched that in the daytime. It's like a giant ball bearing, So all through my life, I've had these experiences to where I don't need to know whether it's real or not. I don't need to ask Eric Davis if this is if this stuff is real. I already know, I've seen it. And seen it with witnesses. So it's interesting to me. But one of the things, I'll tell you a story, which is really, I've been allowed to tell this story. I just got permission today. But, I'm very good friends with a lot of the guys in Aerosmith. And Brad Whitford's parents, I think it was, or maybe his grandparents, had an experience. They lived in Massachusetts and they would go up to New Hampshire. Zach Whitford, who's also an incredible experiencer himself, told me that his grandmother, it was the same time, date of Barney and Betty Hill. They were on the same road, had the same experiences, and it had happened to them, and they never said anything. So one of the things that I think is important for people that have anomalous things happen to them is to report it, is to say something. Because I think it'll help the greater good. I like a lot of people are embarrassed or they'll think they're crazy. There's such a stigma to it. And I've known so many airline pilots that have told me the most unbelievable stories. But again, they would lose their job or they would be considered to be medically incompetent to work. So I think it's important that if anybody has weird stuff happen, to report it, and to let people know and to keep a record of it and try to remember and write down as many facets of it. And that's what I try to do when I see these. I was like, is there noise? Is it stationary? Is it bobbing? Is there, anything about it? And so I know it's real. I know it's out there. Where they're from and what it is, I don't know. But from talking to valet and reading a lot of the literature, I'm not sure it's all positive. It could be nefarious at the same time. There may be some of this which is really good and some of it which is not so good. And the thing that troubled me for the longest time is I knew Ryan and Bob Wood, and they said there's been 70 crashes of UFOs. And I'm thinking Qantas has been flying since 1947 and has never had a crash. What's wrong with these UFOs? They're falling from the skies, And so I remember somebody that you and I know, I asked one of the big guys one night, I said, so why do UFOs crash? And there was a very long pause. And he said to me, they don't. I said, they don't crash. He said, no. I said, well, and what's going on? And he said, well, what if you had some technology that you wanted to introduce to people and mankind? You could throw it in the back of a C-130 and throw it into a cornfield in Iowa somewhere, and then people would find it. Or, it was a theatrical thing. And I was like, well, that's really unusual. And then I started thinking, well, could explain some of this. And I know that Bob Bigelow has considered some of the stuff as gifts that they're found. He calls them gifts, not crashes. That here, figure that out, see how far you get with that.
Well, there's another part to this though that I always find unusual when people bring that up. Why do you have the technology to cross the universe and then get here and then crash your ship? And you know what my answer is? How many times have we successfully put something on the moon or Mars? Everything crashes. We're in an alien atmosphere, and we don't have control of what's going on. Now, you may understand space, right? You may understand how to travel on your planet. You get here and you're introduced to another atmosphere. There's interference. Of course, we shoot first and ask questions later. There's that aspect too. But there's other things here that could interfere with your instruments. We just tried to land on the moon a couple of weeks ago. What happened? Well, that thing is sitting sideways, right? We did, and that's.
I think the Japanese landed upside down.
Yeah, exactly. So, I don't know. I don't have any real answers for that. But I did want to ask you this really quick. The Wilson Davis memo.
Right.
And then I want to circle back to the Arrow report that was released last week too, as well. But the Wilson Davis memo, I was skeptical at first when I had first read it. It felt like somebody's imagination. That's all. Okay, that was the skeptic in me. I don't believe everything. But now I read it, and there are things in there factually that kind of trip me out. And I think that the Wilson Davis memo is accurate now. I think it is. I think Eric Davis had that conversation with Thomas Wilson in the back of a car, and he took the notes and recorded it the best that he could. When you read that, what went through your mind?
Well, one, I know Eric very well, and I know that I could not ask Eric outright because he can't answer the question. He has not said it's fake, but he just doesn't answer it, period, right? And I know better than to say to him anything about the document. But when I read it, I spotted something in there that rang true to me that may not have rang true to a lot of people. And that was how Eric got to meet Wilson, and that was a guy at AFIO, which I'm a member of, and his name was Rich, who I know, and Rich was the facilitator. And so for me, that's an obscure thing for someone writing a fake document to know, because you would have to know the inner workings of AFIO. You would have to know who the key people are there and how they were in a position to be able to put Eric with this person. But you know what? I'm not. I want it to be real. Let's put it that way. I got to spend time with Ed Mitchell. I got to photograph Ed Mitchell. He's told me some crazy stories. I got to meet one of the guys up at Los Alamos. That's a guy named John Dale, who told me he spotted a UFO above the laboratory, and it looked like a whale. And that's restricted airspace up there. And he watched this thing. So, this stuff is going on, and these guys, these scientists know it. But I think the key scientists aren't working on whatever they need to be working on. I think Gary Nolan and Avi Lowe and some of these people need to be turned loose on some of this technology, because who knows who's trying to work with it? Who knows who these people are?
Yeah, the part about Oak Shannon when Oak Shannon came out and said, no, I talked to Eric and I talked to Admiral Wilson, and they asked me about each other, and I vouched for the both of them. Oak Shannon is not a name that anybody...
Exactly. Yeah. You would have to really be an insider to create this document. I knew John Lear really well. He was a total trickster. And back in the day, I don't know if you remember this, Jimmy, because there used to be things you could buy at the Inn of the Seventh Ray and other bookstores in LA called, it was like a mimeograph thing, like a little booklet that would come out every 6 weeks. And it would be about UFOs, alternative energy, and everything. And the guy that did it was a guy named Val Valerian, who
I
really was a
remember.
guy named
Oh
John.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay. So I ended up tracking Val Valerian down, and he ended up being a guy like Richard Doughty. He was an Air Force intelligence officer named John Grace, and he and John Lear concocted the Krill Papers. I don't know if you remember the Krill Papers, but it was
I
about,
do.
aliens underneath Area 51 and a gunfight and people being killed and everything. So this was a total fabrication that John Grace and John Lear did. Lear liked to do these cosmic haikus. So I thought that was really funny, but then it got adapted by another guy, and then that supposedly all took place under Dulce, New Mexico. So that whole story suddenly migrated over. It became an urban myth. But one night I thought I would trick John Lear, and I invited John Lear to our house for dinner, and I invited one of the key guys at the Skunk Works. And I got to watch them, John do his thing, and then the guy from the Skunk Works argue. Yeah.
Well, see that going back to the Arrow report. I'm going to say this. You brought up Plant 4 and a few other things. You know where I live, and Skunk Works is about a mile and a half that way. Okay, the back of my house faces the front of Skunk Works. Okay, it's pretty trippy how close I am. And for about, you don't see it like I did before, but over the last 2 years, it stopped, I'm going to say about 6 months ago. And I don't want to give away secrets. I don't want to get in trouble. Everybody in Palmdale, all the security, they know who I am. They know what I do. They know where I live.
All
right. So, oh, trust me. So anyway, but I'll say this. About 2 years ago, there was a heavy amount of transport planes leaving, right? And I would watch video and watch and document and watch them take off, turn, and then go land at Edwards. They would never achieve altitude.
Right.
You know what I mean? I don't even think they put their landing gear up. Right? Take off, turn, level off, and land at Edwards. All right. This is going on and going on and going on. And then Grush does his testimony.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, combined with the Wilson Davis document, which talks about Lockheed and his meeting out here, and then Grush saying what he's saying, it felt to me like they were emptying the warehouses. You know what I mean? Like they knew something was, about to, and that's my take on things. Because it's those
possible they do have something they're deploying, but they wouldn't have taken it to Edwards. I think they would have taken it elsewhere. But
well, Edwards is a lot more secure than, believe it or not, than Skunk Works. I don't know. I'm just saying that suddenly all those transport planes have stopped. But mean, for about a year, man, it was like 2-3 times a day.
They were moving something, and then they move it to other places, probably Utah, because 51 has become such a tourist attraction now, and so many people looking at it that I think they've got another place that they work hardcore out of in Utah. The Dugway proving ground area out there where they test nerve gas, so nobody wants to walk through there. But I became really good friends with T.D. Barnes. T.D. Barnes was in charge of everything flying in and out of Area 51, and he's a really cool guy. And he won't talk about some things, but he's given me some things to think about. That there are maybe 5 to 6 generations beyond of what we think they have, that they're well beyond that, 20, 30 years ahead of where we think they should be. So there could be a lot of these things that people are seeing that are in fact U.S. tech. And TD said that one of the things they like to do is to confound the Russians. So they would actually cut things out of cardboard to create weird airplane shapes. They would then take hair dryers with extension cords and go along the outside of the perimeter of these cutouts, knowing that the Russian satellite was going to come over with an infrared camera, and it would photograph these things, and they would think that we had made some breakthrough in a certain wing design or a certain design, and it would send them off into the, into the weird things, But so I could see where they could do a lot of that. On the roof of the Skunk Works is a skunk, and they put that there for the Russian satellites. When they fly over, they see the skunk on the roof.
Yeah, it's a trippy place, man, and I've seen some crazy stuff. And then we have the Arrow report that was released 2 weeks ago, which I think that's Sean Kirkpatrick. Nobody signed it, but I'm assuming he's the author.
I think it's probably been put together by a group of people that didn't know, because they were using Wikipedia and other places.
I know.
That's like, okay, you can trust Wikipedia.
yeah. The AI wrote that report. But anyway, attributing all of these sightings in a general sense to our tech. And 133 countries in the world have had UFO sightings. So it's not like it's just over the United States. And the amount of credible sightings. Now, look, I understand that a U-2, an SR-71, or an F-117 seen for the first time could be misidentified as something. But Fravor and the Tic Tac, I have issues with that.
Yeah.
I have real big issues. Plus the sightings that I have had, like you have had. Yeah. That's you can't explain that away as our tech.
Well, they needed to put the toothpaste back in the tube, but it was rather sloppy job of doing it. But basically, you take a guy who does not have high enough security clearance to go ask questions. So he goes over to a defense contractor, and he doesn't have a need to know. His name's not on the bigot list, and he comes there and says, "Are you guys reverse engineering?" And they said, "No, not happening over here." Okay, thank you. But I think his security clearances were not high enough for him to actually get the correct information.
Well, you're right about that. Robert, you brought up SAPs and USAPs. If Congress and the Senate and the Oval Office don't know the inner workings of these SAPs and what's involved and how they're funded and what's going on inside of them, certainly Sean Kirkpatrick suddenly doesn't have a hall pass, right, where he can go and unravel all of these. No, I don't see that as reality.
No. And, there are supposedly 40 people with firsthand information that want to come forward, but they're kind of terrified to now. Because, the bought off press has sort of, really made fun of Gresh and a whole lot of the other researchers. So we're kind of back to square one, I suppose. But then it's just white noise. You pay no attention to it. You go on with what you know, and stuff's going to happen. And, I think it's going to keep happening, and they're going to have a hard time explaining it.
The names, right? The Hal Putoffs, the Eric Davises, the Kit Greens, should they do something public with the Senate? Would you be surprised if John Alexander and Kit Green sat down with Marco Rubio and started answering questions?
I suspect that the key guys would have briefed those key people. They should have, because they were gatekeepers. They would know. But so I can't tell you whether they did or didn't, but I assume. But I've asked those guys about David Gresh, and they all call him a patriot, a hero, a true American, a brave man, 100% reliable. Nobody can find anything, even the people within the government have not come out with any negative things about him. He's an up and up guy. I mean, he's sort of off the spectrum. And when I first saw him talk, I didn't understand what was going on there. I thought, whoa, this guy has a really weird parlance, but maybe there's some autism there or something, but he's got an unusual take on things, and so I find I deal with a lot of young musicians, and I have some very high autistic kids that are amazing drummers that are out touring the world right now, and they're just better than most people because they're so aware of something. And in a way, it's a kind of a gift, this condition is actually helping them with mental clarity. So, but I have a lot of friends like, my buddy Zach Whitford, he was staying up at Steven Tyler's house above the Guitar Center Hollywood in the hills there. And he had a tremendous sighting over the top of what would have been the Sunset Marquee, this giant thing, which he was able to draw and it's really detailed. And, he came forward with this, and he knew I wouldn't be give him any bad grief on it. So I introduced him to Leslie Keane, who then took him and introduced him to Whitley Strieber, and who introduced him to Diana Poselka, who I think is amazing. I love her work. And so he's embraced this, and his thing is that he really wants people to know, tell people when you see something. But again, look at this. This is generational. His father saw stuff. His grandmother had an experience on the same road in the same time frame as Barty and Benny Hill. Sometimes I think it actually runs through certain families. It's an interesting thing. But yeah. So here we are. Rock and roll.
Yeah, exactly. Totally. Are you as surprised as I am when you look at the Rand Corporation or Condon or Brookings or any of the so-called reports that talked about public awareness of the subject of ET and contact would drive the world into anarchy, right? That we would implode. Well, I think it's pretty front and center right now, and the world didn't implode.
Not really. And I think people are so jaded from TV and movies and, all these different things that it's like it might be a thing for a couple of days and then they move on. It didn't do anything. It didn't push the needle any direction particularly. And I think a lot of people don't even want to know. You ask them, maybe they didn't even hear about it, Certainly overseas, that's the case. Certainly down here in New Zealand, we don't get all of this. It's a very peaceful, gentle country. We don't have all that craziness. But there's a new program I'm watching. I don't know if you've seen it yet, called Third Body Problem.
Love it.
It is very interesting on Netflix, and it's done by the producers of Game of Thrones and Brad Pitt. And it's addressing this unusual phenomenon.
Okay, there are right now, I was going to do a video about this. Okay, there are technically four. I can go with four, and I can add a fifth. But there are 3 series that were just released right now, all dealing with nearly the exact situation. There's the TV series The Signal, the TV series Constellation, and 3 Body Problem, all deal with us getting a signal from space and the implications of it. Now, I think that's by design, Robert.
I think there is that. I know that Diana Pasulka might have had an option done on 2 of her books. So there's interesting in the tie-in with religion and how long these phenomena has happened in the religious context as well. I mean, the Bible is full of things that you could call UAPs or NHI. And, that was one of the things when I was a kid growing up, I'd ask my father about it. I mean, they wouldn't answer it. They didn't really know what to make of it, actually. Particularly in the book of Revelations, where there's a 1,200-mile cube that parks off the earth. I mean, that's right there in the Bible. It looks like the Borg ship. I'm like, what is that? And that's right there. It's been there all along,
What do you make of Chris Bledsoe?
There's something in, I don't know him and I don't know too much about it, but, in remote viewing, there's something called AOL, analytical overlay. And sometimes if somebody has a really profound belief system, everything will fall under that context. In other words, like in remote viewing, if you say, I know what the target is while you're starting to work the remote viewing target, they'll tell you to throw it out because it's an analytical overlay. I don't know. I know a lot of people that are in the know are kind of keeping them at arm's distance. I don't know why. So,
Well, but then there's the other people in the know, like Pasolka and John Alexander and Jim Semivan. The list is long. That all went out and visited with Chris, and there's a weird spin. And Tom DeLonge said Tom's done like 2 interviews over the years. One of them was here on this show, and he had said something that stuck with me on that show, and he said that there are those in the Pentagon, in the military, that also hold deep religious beliefs, and that we need to be careful about who we're trying to make friends with in the sky, that they all may not be as kind as we think. And there are some that would refer to that as demonic. And I think that's a pretty interesting spin. Do you agree with that?
I don't know if I agree with it, but it's certainly one possibility, because the Bible, in fact, talks about a group that tries to interfere with mankind, that created an advanced civilization, and the angel of the Lord came down and destroyed it. And it said, look what man is doing. There'll be no stopping what he's capable of doing, speaking one language. So they babbled everybody's language. Now, that's in the book of Genesis. So I remember being up at a think tank in Arlington, Virginia, and they were looking at different things and that could end the world. It would cause panic, like a massive tidal wave or this and this and this. And then I brought up the rapture, and it was not on their list, and they had to think about that. But then, I just said, there could be these other possibilities of what things could be, So sometimes people have blinders on. They don't look at the full spectrum of possibility. They just have an idea what it is, and they stick to it, And I think it constantly evolves as you watch we've gone from like people coming from 100 million light years away to people that live here with us now. It's sort of moving to that group. And the Bible talks about that, and ancient texts talk about it, and the Mahabharata talks about it, and the Indians certainly have a history of flying machines, and so
have we moved? Well, I think it's a mix of things. Okay, right. Actual physical craft, crossing, with some dude driving it. Yeah, there's that. There's a lot of that. But there is an entangled, interdimensional, multiverse, parallel world part of this too, as well, that is coexisting, which would explain why some things that we see, I have seen, have appeared and disappeared.
Yeah,
right.
I mean,
that's
John Alexander, when I've had talks with him about what is going on, John, because he spent a lot of time at Skinwalker, as did Eric Davis. And he said, well, bottom line, there's more than one it. It's like finding a cockroach in your kitchen. If you think it's the only one in your house, you're crazy. I mean, I got some stories for the next time we get together. I can tell you about people that have been abducted over and over and over, and things that they've seen. And this is not in the United States. Just people I ran into in Puerto Rico and other parts of the world. Very interesting stories. There's a commonality there, but it fascinates me. I've always been fascinated by it, but at the end of the day, I'm a rock and roll photographer.
Exactly. One last thing before we run out of time. When we have the contactees, the experiencers, and the abduction phenomenon, of which, if we ran the numbers, and I've seen some of the poll numbers where
we're talking
about
claim it,
right, millions. And this can't be some deep-rooted psychosis. That there is something.
No, but it could be two different things that are happening simultaneously. It could be like that Balinese thing I saw, where an entire village twice a month becomes possessed, and then the demons move on, and then they go on with their lives. And then you go like, but wait, what happened? And then they say, oh, we became demon possessed. They come here twice a month, and we do this thing, and then we go, and they leave. I'm like, whoa, that is really weird. They take it as a matter of fact, and then So it could be another phenomena parallel to it. But, you know, I think Jack Valet has really the key, because a lot of his writings, when you go over it, he's probably been into this longer than anybody. And you read The Messengers of Deception. That's an interesting book.
Well, see,
You know,
and he tried to. Now, we're listening now, but Jacques was writing about this 30, 40 years ago, about
yes,
an interdimensional aspect to this, that it may not be necessarily what we think it is, that there is something else going on here that we don't at all understand.
yeah,
Today, we're smarter, and physics is certainly pointing us in that direction, about, you know, multiverse and parallel worlds and other
yeah.
dimensions and so forth. But Jacques has been writing about this for a long time, and it makes
Hal
me
has been into it. Yeah, I know Hal gave me a report that he wrote, a paper he wrote. It was probably around 2000 on ultra terrestrials, where he goes into great detail. Now he's made that report public recently. It's out there. You can look for it on the internet. It's an interesting thing. Now that's 25 years old. Predates
Yeah.
probably drones. You know,
When are you coming over to the States again?
I don't know. I was there for Crossroads with Eric Clapton. We reunited the team again, and we photographed that, my wife and I. And if anybody wants to see the work, you can go to our website, and we sell limited edition prints. My wife is an amazing photographer. She's Carlos Santana's photographer for the last decade and a half. So she has amazing stuff, and she's a trained remote viewer. So she's an interesting person.
Yeah, the links for Robert are below. We've also got them over on the website and throughout social media.
Yeah.
Man, 35 years.
I'm on Instagram. I mean, there's like 1,300 photos on Instagram people can look at. You know, there's a lot of people that come up there and steal them and repost them.
I can't wait to see you again, my friend. Get over here so we can break some bread.
All right, man. It's been great talking to you. I've enjoyed it.
You're the best, Robert. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Robert M. Knight, everybody. His links are below. We've got them in over on the website and throughout social media. What a great conversation tonight. Perfect show for me. Rock and roll and UFOs. It doesn't get any better than that. I want to remind everybody, tomorrow night on the show is Vivian Chavez, and we will be discussing our galactic origins. All of that tomorrow night. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Kevin. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music, Doug Aldrich. Intro, Spaceboy, spaceboymusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network, and this broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2024 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Until tomorrow night with Vivian Chavez, I want you to be safe. Go Beckley Tappy.